Despite the fact that the Book of Boba Fett finally offers some deeper insight into someone that is arguably the most disproportionately popular Star Wars character in history, at least in terms of their actual canonical screen time, the series has been met with mixed results, and it's not hard to understand why. Within the 7 episodes of the show thus far, it seems like the series doesn't know what direction it wants to go in, or what it should be. And it also seems like the writers were fixated on cramming as many characters and as much information as possible into the first season while not really giving enough attention or development to anything. The Book of Boba Fett seems overly focused on pulling a lot of disparate threads together, and the resulting narrative doesn't really feel like its own story. Ultimately, it seems like the vast majority of the show's elements went to waste. And nothing exemplifies this issue more clearly than the fact that the Book of Boba Fett essentially introduced Cad Bane as nothing more than a red shirt. Speaking as someone who is a middling fan of the entire Star Wars universe, and has a passing knowledge of some of the bigger names and places in the expanded universe, Cad Bane was a recognizable character despite the fact that I had never seen any of the animated series. However, on the basis that he was a fairly recognizable character alone, it seemed obvious that his epic introduction in From the Desert Comes a Stranger was just the first taste of a much grander story that would likely play out across multiple seasons, or even series. However, the only sincerely satisfying moment that the Book of Boba Fett allowed Cad Bane was his flawless introduction in a classic Western standoff. And the fact that he lasted for an episode and a half is arguably the biggest waste in the Star Wars TV universe thus far. One of the fundamental flaws of the Book of Boba Fett, in comparison to something like The Mandalorian, is that while The Mandalorian incorporates elements of the broader Star Wars canon, and even aspects of the expanded universe, having prior knowledge of these facets of the Star Wars galaxy isn't a prerequisite to understand or appreciate what's happening in the story itself. The narrative can stand alone as an enjoyable tale, and viewers who have never seen a Star Wars movie can still enjoy the series on its own. The Book of Boba Fett has taken the exact opposite tactic, and the show has clearly suffered for it. Although it does have its own storyline, it's so focused on so many different aspects of the Star Wars universe that it's pretty much impossible to fully appreciate every part of the series without having watched nearly a dozen movies and multiple TV shows beforehand. And Boba Fett's entirely unexplained rivalry that is concluded in the Book of Boba Fett's finale is a perfect example of this problem. Bane's first scene in From the Desert Comes a Stranger vaguely alludes to some history between him and the titular bounty hunter, but a casual viewer might not even pick up on that hint. From a cinematic perspective, the show clearly indicates that Bane is a serious threat from the very start, and that ultra badass villain framing continues into the season finale. But again, the narrative does nothing to actually elaborate on that. And the few scenes that he does have in the following episode make him seem like little more than a lackey for the Pike Syndicate. Cad shooting Cobb Vanth seems like nothing more than a transparent motivation for the citizens of Freetown to join Boba's fight, which is a role that could have been performed by anyone. And Bane's role in the finale is arguably even less exciting than just being the predicating factor to Boba's squad being bolstered by a few more fighters. The finale battle is incredibly busy already, but Cad's 2 scenes with Boba are actually even more confusing. Their conversations offer hardly any context for their actual relationship, and although their scenes are clearly meant to convey some tension, there's no actual narrative meat to anything that's happening, unless the viewer already knows who Cad Bane is and how he knows Boba Fett to begin with. Once again, the actual filmic storytelling of their final confrontation plays their interactions off like this is a truly climactic moment for Boba. But Bane's exposition dump dialogue is incredibly clunky. And despite attempting to stuff as much information into as few minutes as possible, the result is little more than some vague allusions that Boba and Bane have a significant amount of personal history. And even for someone who is only hazily familiar with Cad Bane as a character, his quick death was incredibly disappointing. But even more importantly, extremely confusing. So it's not hard to imagine how frustrated fans who are actually deeply invested in his character must have been. The introduction of the character, as well as the hints to his connection with Boba Fett, made it seem like Cad Bane was final boss material. But the show treated him as nothing more than a redshirt who was seemingly intended to signal some serious characteristic change within Boba Fett, without ever explaining why Boba killing Bane was a confirmation that Fett had completely changed from the ruthless bounty hunter he once was. It wouldn't come as any great surprise to see Cad Bane show up in other live-action Star Wars properties, now that he has been introduced. But he's clearly emblematic of an issue that the franchise desperately needs to avoid. The Star Wars universe is unimaginably large, but every individual story needs to stand on its own feet and be fully comprehensible to any level of Star Wars fan. And unfortunately, the Book of Boba Fett completely missed that mark. On a smaller level, though, it's just disappointing that a character with so much potential wound up being such a letdown in live action. The Book of Boba Fett clearly leaned into the Western aspect of space westerns, but the final showdown with Cad Bane wouldn't give a layman the impression that he's even a particularly threatening lackey of the Pike Syndicate. Bane's inclusion in the series felt like the very end of a long story that hadn't actually been explained within the Book of Boba Fett itself. And the show bafflingly didn't even take the time to establish their relationship to make what happened within the series remotely meaningful. There is, of course, the significant possibility that Bane's death in the finale was nothing more than a fake-out. After all, it is an incredibly weak farewell for a character that hasn't even gotten any room to breathe in live action thus far. Plus, despite the fact that Cad appeared to be dead, his supposedly fatal injury didn't seem particularly grievous. However, even if the show or the broader Star Wars universe chooses to go that route, then it would obviously undermine the entire purpose of making Boba killing Bane into Boba's climactic moment at the end of the season to begin with. Unfortunately, no matter which way the writers decide to go with Cad Bane, they've cut themselves off at the knees in one way or another, by both attempting to make him significant and not treating him like he's significant in the Book of Boba Fett. In the end, the question really seems to be, what was the point? I know that Cad Bane is one of the most badass bounty hunters in the galaxy, but I only know that because I Googled it, which is an astounding failure on the part of the series. Plenty of fans have pointed out the issue that the Book of Boba Fett doesn't really seem like it's about Boba Fett, and few things could represent that more aptly than Cad Bane's role in the story. And it's incomprehensible and incredibly unfortunate that the Book of Boba Fett took one of the most important players in Boba Fett's history and reduced him to a redshirt who just showed up for less than 2 episodes in order to die. But what do you think? Was introducing Cad Bane at the end of the Book of Boba Fett even worth it? Leave your thoughts and opinions below, and if you're interested in more content like this, like and subscribe.